I think we can start the workshop. Hey, Shadamura, hello to you. We've had the primer. We've gone over what we have been building step by step in the background for our setting, and you know what? Our setting doesn't even have a name. It has puns. It has all this other stuff. We haven't thought of a name for it yet, and that's fine. Derek is getting ready for some re-education. What I would like to play for you to help get us into the mindfulness, the thinking for culture and economics. Well, Max, I guess it could be either, but primarily because we're starting with this corner of the world, it might help if we think, think global but act local. So if we come up with a name for this area from the perspective of those who live there, from the history that we've made. But what I would like to do to help us get into the mindset, the mood for some economics and such, I would like to play a video for you all. It's only, honestly, it's not even, it says 6 minutes, but there's a little bit of, stuff on the back end that we could probably cut out here. But what I would like to do is to play this for you so that you know where I'm going to be addressing, the themes and the concepts. So actually, I can, if I move that off, I can widen this more. I guess we could try theater mode. There we go. Okay, so that is put away. And for any of you, if you want to watch it later, I will put it here. But I would like you to watch this along with me and understand, and you don't need any advanced degree. You don't have to have a mind for business. I would just like you to sit back and let this concept sink in, because we're going to be approaching this from a very easy methodology. Because economics and even culture, we can take it, we can extrapolate it to fantastic, super professional, super precise points. But we can't do that unless we have a foundation. Hello, Grim. Welcome. So, Grim, sit back with the rest of us as I put on a presentation for you here that I want you to watch and glom onto as we're getting ready to talk about culture and economics in your fantasy setting.
This is the world we live in. If we weren't surrounded by it every day, if we didn't take it for granted, we'd be dumbstruck by its very intricacy and brilliance. This is an ordinary, familiar wooden pencil. You might think a pencil is simple. Chances are you've been using one since before you could even read or write. But just because it's familiar doesn't mean it's simple. In fact, it's complicated, elaborate, beautiful, elegant. Its very existence is too improbable for any one person to truly comprehend. These are the basic materials that go into a pencil: graphite, cedar, metal, and rubber. But if you had all the elements of a pencil right in front of you, could you make a pencil? It's not as easy as you might think. In fact, no single person on the face of the earth could do it without the help of countless others. And this is the key to understanding the world. A pencil, just like you and me, is the end result of a vast and intricate family tree, a symphony of human activity that spans the globe. Through their work and knowledge, a vast number of people have had a hand in making this simple pencil. Unlike your family tree, this one begins with an actual tree. The most immediate ancestor of the pencil is a cedar tree in the Pacific Northwest. But the loggers who harvest the timber are also its ancestors. And these men don't work alone. They, in turn, are assisted by the people and industries that produce the saws, rope, and countless other tools that they use. These are also the ancestors of our pencil. As is the waitress at a nearby diner who sells the loggers lunch, to say nothing of the thousands of people involved in producing that simple midday meal. Across time and space, the web grows. Consider the roads, trucks, ships, communication systems, and the people who design, build, and maintain them. All of them are necessary to bring the lumber to the mills and the slat factories that process them. All of them are also the ancestors of the pencil. And even with the work of all these people, so far all we have is a stained wooden slat, a naked half of a wooden body of a pencil. But its family tree is larger and more extensive. The graphite is mined in China and Sri Lanka. At the pencil factory, it's mixed with clay and heat and other materials before it's extruded, dried, and baked in a kiln. People from different continents, different cultures, cooperate to bring these materials together with waxes and kilns and equipment from across the world. These too are the ancestors of the pencil. And the same is true of the eraser. With ingredients from around the world, it's the end result of a similarly complex and exotic branch of the family tree. As is the ferrule, the metal band made from material that is mined, refined, and shipped from all over the world. Each part of the pencil is the result of the collaboration and cooperation of millions of people. Together, they form a process that is constantly changing and adapting. A change in the availability or cost of material from one place might make another source more desirable, and the process changes and adapts fluidly. And there is a fact that's still more astounding: the absence of a mastermind, of anyone dictating these countless actions which bring a pencil into being. Each member of this family tree supplies only a small amount of the necessary know-how needed to make a pencil. They do so voluntarily, not because they necessarily want pencils or like pencils, but because by working to create them, they exchange their labor and skills for the wages that let them buy what they want and need. What you're seeing is the market at work. The spontaneous configuration of creative human energies, of millions of people with their various skills and talents organizing voluntarily in response to human necessity and desire, as if led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of the intention. Every second we are alive, we benefit from the products of voluntary, spontaneous cooperation. This is the modern world. It's miraculous, it's intricate, and it gets better every day, so long as people are free to interact with each other. If we can leave the creative energies of humankind uninhibited, there's no limit to what we can accomplish.
Hi everyone, I'm back. So I hope that you had enjoyed what the primer to this, what has gone into the concept of economics. The plight of the pen. Well, pardon me. That's true. Someone had to go out and kill a bird, pluck its feathers. Someone had to go out and, I mean, look, someone's job is to milk the squids. And you know what? If that's your job, then someone's got to milk the squids, because we need that ink. But it's... So I guess in that, do we have ink maids? You know, if we have milkmaids, do we have ink maids? You can get up at 4 in the morning. You go out to the big aquarium for the barn, and you just round up the squids. You can kind of give them a, and there you go. That's how we get ink. Diadems, hello. Gracie says, I want to say hi, but my Twitch is being stupid and not loading the stream. Oh no, Gracie. There's your cornerstone of this world's economics, ink maids. And you know what? This is a fantasy world, and we can absolutely, if we want ink maids who go out and milk giant squids that are kept as cattle, why not? It's the world that we want to present. It's the world that we want to share with others. Let me get this back to where it needs to be. Bloop, bloop, bloop. That goes up a little ways. And then this, boop, 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 boop. There we go. So yes, it's, hey, well, so talking about industry and ink, what about Bendy? So I hope that that was a good primer video for you to consider the way in which, in the way in which we work. How is it? And you know what? Ink can play into this, Reezy, because we established in conversation that paper is a big part of this culture and of the economy. And of course, we're going to need a way to scrawl upon the paper. And so if we want to set up some kind of aquaculture of ink maids that go out and milk the squids every morning, then maybe that's what we need. We have Vidalcan. Vidalcan are a semi-amphibious race. So they're used to being in and around the water. And hello, Crazed. Thank you for joining us.
Sound a feasting horn.
Oh, and then also, subsequently, thank you very much for the follow. Mind Flayers could make a mint, but they are on ink strike. Well, if we wanted to expand the ecology, and maybe Mind Flayers or Elithids are, we present them mechanically, though culturally they could be different in some way. You can go through and you could describe the Vidalcan as Mind Flayers, if you wish. Why not? Reskin them. Have it be what's appropriate for your setting. And based on the needs of the people who live in that region, that is going to develop, it's going to contribute to the culture and to the economy of what and who we have in this area. And I want to open up the workshop then. Remember, here's our worksheet. We don't need something fancy. Maybe if it comes down to a random roll for something, sure, we can look into it. But if we have an aquatic race, we have an avian race, we have this place is known for greedy merchants, so we do have some kind of when I say advanced, it doesn't have to mean like credit card and PayPal exist kind of a thing. In aquatic race and avian race, we do have, though, a market system in place. So we have a market system and a trade routes and a trade system. There is some kind of military protection with the checkpoints and the tax collections along the roads as well. This is a bureaucracy, right? If we ever need a reminder, we come back here. Our terrain types are forests and grasslands. The government is a bureaucracy. We look at the founder, who is a bugbear alchemist, an artificer, if you aren't aware. Someone made this sealed pyramid, and we discussed that prior to even the Aarakocra moving in from the mountains out east, that this must have been a big floodplain, and merfolk had existed here. It's kind of like the primordial, cousin or ancestor. Something came and made a dead magic zone, and this is going to also impact our culture and even our economics. The racial minority are refugees from a plague, and we rolled that the Vidalcan were our minority race. They came here because they were escaping a plague. And another thing for us to think about, too, when we say dominant or minority, is this simply based on one's genetic makeup? Could this be just the population number? How do we want to break into the demographics? Because nothing here says that, well, they're the dominant race or the Aarakocra it's this avian, these avian humanoids. The Vidalcan, being rather intelligent, being practitioners of magic, while they in the they might have a minority of the population, but the Vidalcan could make for excellent bureaucrats. And they could end up being the ones who actually came here, started organizing the Aarakocra that were just kind of hanging out in the trees and whatever ruins might have been left behind. And then they're the ones who are in the bureaucracy. They're the ones who are the rulers, even though they are a racial minority in this demographic, a numerical minority. And let's not even, we can break it down further. If we said the Aarakocra are here, do we want to allow for the avians, the avians from the plane shift Magic the Gathering races, to be a subclass or an alternate form? If we say that people can take the tiefling, but only if it's the flying variety, to reflect that the tieflings are simply a derivative of the Aarakocra. There's an important library here. This place is known for greedy merchants. There are undead stirring in cemeteries, and what does that mean for our culture? What does that mean for our economics? Whether it comes into making a business about putting the dead back to rest, or even hucksters going through and selling fake charms to ward off the undead. When we went through, and especially what resources are available, because the concept of scarcity is important to economics. What lives in our forests? What lives in our grasslands? Our grasslands are known for varietal fiends. Local to you, you might have a marsh that is, there's like 100 different bird species that live in this marsh. Well, the grasslands here are known for varietal fiends. So instead, we might go, and they're along the riverbank. There's about half a dozen species of imp that have been kind of nesting and making their home here. And that the common predator type, like the apex predator that's moving in and is destroying the fiends, are undead. And of course, this is a case of it writes itself. So what, gargoyles, Max Meister? Sorry, I missed out on some chat here because I was on a soapbox. James says that's why Cthulhu's so mad. The primary export is ink. Would they export the ink? I mean, maybe it's valuable enough, but their culture might want to value it and say that we're not going to export any. Let's see. Oh, so that was the Mind Flayers comment. Crazed says, personally, a couple of games ago, I played with a bunch of homebrewed races, and decided to watch streams after that to see what people come up with on their own. So is that an indication that you had fun, or that you thought something was way over the top or too wacky? Still, Crazed Lunatic, I'm glad that you found us, because in this workshop, we put a lot of thought into what we teach and what we develop together. Whether it's character creation, setting creation, we've made monsters and spells and magic items, and, going through things step by step and discussing not just the product, but the context to it all too. Yep, we had our tear ducks. So abyssal chickens would be like quails out in the fields, and then of course we have our tear ducks that are aquatic fiends. I'm glad you had fun because, D&D is it taps into our ability to tell stories, which is our unique gift as a species. Would this society be good with archery and writing? Having a mainly avian society is going to mean a lot of shed feathers, perfect for arrows, quills, etc. And so, Max, what you had come across is exactly what would this as a species? What would our Aarakocra do? Would they view it as, do we as human beings take human hair and turn it into paintbrushes? Or do we? Would it be a weird thing, a taboo thing, or honestly, would it just be practical? Yeah, my mattress is stuffed with my own feathers, or people who donate feathers so that we can all sleep comfortably. Would archery exist? And Max, the Aarakocra, I believe in prior editions. Was it that way in 4th? I think it might have been that way in 3rd edition and before. The Aarakocra had a special bow that was a foot bow, because they would fly, but they would have a bow that they would hold in one taloned foot, and then pull back with the other, and they would actually shoot arrows with their feet. And I'll tell you, there are human beings. You can watch these videos on YouTube. There are people without arms that do archery with their feet, and they're very accurate. Because, their body and the way that they function may be different, but you can learn to use what you have. Hey, Panda. Human hair is used to measure temperature and humidity in old hydrothermometers. And hello, hamsters with hats. In this way, if we think of the uses for that, then that could very well be the case where maybe we say that their talons shed and their feathers shed and can be reused. So feathers could even be a form of currency. You only have so much of it. You only have so many feathers. So that could be a way to barter. It could be a way to back up something or another. We think of gold as the gold standard, and the reason why we have historically used gold is because gold has a scarcity, and it also doesn't tarnish. Well, not unless you're mixing it with mercury and some other things, but it doesn't. For common wear and tear, if it gets wet, it won't rust, it won't deplete, and that made it valuable because it was sparkly. And there wasn't a lot of it, so people who had it, and also at the time, there wasn't necessarily another use for it. So it had a perfect niche. And if it wasn't for the fact that aluminum was, at the time, despite how pervasive aluminum is in our world, let alone maybe this fantasy world, aluminum would have been gold because it doesn't tarnish, because it's lightweight. You can mold it easily. It's easy to work with. You can use it for a lot of things that, won't poison you. However, due to the, compared to that time, compared to the complexity to extract aluminum from the soil, aluminum was known to exist, and there's a couple things that might have been done with it. But you know what? Gold was a lot more visible and a lot more workable. And so that became our gold standard, and that's why our society grew up valuing gold. In this case, because we will talk about culture and economics, I guess we technically are, not will. Does gold even have a place in this society? It doesn't mean that maybe they don't take outsiders' gold. There's roads that lead elsewhere, and perhaps other sentient races that are not Vidalcan, that are not Aarakocra, use different measures. maybe they'd have to, or maybe that is there's currency exchanges here in the Prosperity Mile, where you can take and give out gold pieces and whatnot. Maybe they even sort of mint their own, just as a waypoint or a placeholder. But if you go to Old Town, people trade in feathers, or people trade in talons. The orcs in Warhammer 40,000 use teeth as a currency. Why couldn't you use teeth? In that culture, teeth are valuable. And that's the whole reason why we barter with it. We use it as a currency. If just not a straight up exchange of good for good, labor for labor. Mr. Plunderloot, thank you.
That Horde equaled resist +1 pull off each capsule.
Mr. Plunderloot is going after a horde of skeletons. For the context there, there's a skeleton horde at the store that could use a good home, and so Mr. Plunderloot wants to give our skeletons a good home, and then one each of a capsule. So I'll tell you what, Plunder, if you got some time tonight, I will pull those capsules for you here when we get to a break point. James was saying Raptorans. Maybe that was the name for him. I thought the Aarakocra had the feet bow as well. Or maybe, I don't know, we can just exchange the two names for the same thing. Hygro or Hydro, both are correct. The length of the hair responds to the temperature. The resistance of the hair changes with humidity. And then, do we keep track of these things with our feathers? Okay, Plunder, no problem. And also, hello, Death Angel Shadow. Here we have our avian race. We have feathers. We have talons. In this case, the chickens do, in fact, have large talons. If we come over here and we say, well, what are Aarakocra? At least by default. And by the way, if you want to talk culture, there's nothing wrong with adopting the cultural notes that you find in the source books, because a lot of this thought has been done already for, a race of people that have this particular concern or anatomy or the like. Aarakocra enjoy peace and solitude. Now, do ours have to? They don't have to. But let's read along. Most of them have little interest in dealing with other peoples and less interest in spending time on the ground. For this reason, it takes an exceptional circumstance for an Aarakocra to leave his or her tribe and undertake the adventurer's life. Neither treasure nor glory is enough to lure them from their tribes. A dire threat to their people, a mission of vengeance, or a catastrophe typically lies at the heart of the Aarakocra adventurer's chosen path. Two other circumstances might call an Aarakocra to adventure. First, Aarakocra have historical ties to the Wind Dukes of Akka. Akka! Exceptional individuals honor that connection and might seek out the missing pieces of the Rod of Seven Parts, the remains of an artifact fashioned by the Wind Dukes long ago to defeat the Queen of Chaos's monstrous champion, Miska the Wolf Spider. When plunged into Miska's body, the chaos in his blood sundered the rod and scattered its pieces across the multiverse. Recovering the pieces means gaining honor and esteem in the eyes of the Vati, who forged it and could possibly restore a powerful weapon for defense against the agents of elemental evil. Second, Aarakocra are sworn foes of elemental earth, in particular the gargoyles that serve Ogremok, the Prince of Earth. The Aarakocra word for gargoyle is loosely translated as flying rock, and battles between Aarakocra and gargoyles have raged across the elemental planes of earth and air, occasionally spilling into a world in the material plane. Aarakocra on that plane might leave their colonies to lend aid to other humanoids committed to fighting Earth cults and thwarting their efforts. Here is a lot of background, and in particular, this leans into the supplement for which this was made, which are the Princes of the Apocalypse, because it talks about all of that, about the apocalypse, that you're going to be fighting against an Earth cult and all this. So if we look here, we're feathered. We have talons. We are depicted as having opposable thumbs, if only 4 fingers, though. It doesn't look like Aarakocra have pinkies. What our dress and our fashion for our arms and our armaments would also be into consideration for our economy and our culture. If we wear robes, if we wear headdresses, could an Aarakocra, what kind of a headdress would an Aarakocra wear? So just as us going through this kind of quick and dirty map creation, referencing these things is, referencing pictures like this is also important. And just as well, if we come over here and we wanted to explore the Vidalcan, and remember too, we can look at the winged tieflings. We can look at the winged tieflings as well, if you want inspiration. But we've pretty much just said that they're Aarakocra that just have this fiendish influence. What are the Vidalcan like, as described in this book, but they don't have to be ours? Nothing is perfect. Vidalcan not only believe this fact, they rejoice in it. Every imperfection is a chance for improvement, and progress is an endless march toward a state of perfection that can never be reached. This viewpoint leads Vidalcan to pursue their work with delighted enthusiasm, never deterred by setbacks and excited by every opportunity for improvement. Vidalcan are tall and slender, standing almost a head taller than humans on average, but weighing about the same. Their hairless skin comes in a range of shades of blue. Their eyes are darker shades of blue or violet. They lack external ears, their noses are broad and flat, and they are partially amphibious. Now, just going off of this, we can get into a lot of other aspects. What do you think is this area as a culture? Are they going to have a culture of, let's say, piercing? Aarakocra nor Vidalcan have ears. Vidalcan have noses that are like kind of flatter, broader. Is they're partially amphibious. It would have to, I think that's kind of a vestigial, like, gill kind of a thing. Would they, as a culture, let alone would this go into any jewelry, would they wear jewelry? Do either of them, these are questions to ask yourself as a DM. Here's the big one. Do Aarakocra or Vidalcan have belly buttons? And how could that be important? I mean, for jewelry, there's an obvious answer. And yeah, Panda Frame, we discussed that the avian races in the plane shift documents and the flying tieflings would be variants of the Aarakocra. Would be like sub-races or cousins that would be playable in this adventure setting. If flight is rare among humanoids and trade is based on humanoids, the trade areas should be the lower stations of their society. These creatures would build up high for status and wealth. And you would need to be accessible. And just as well, the Aarakocra and the Vidalcan would each have perhaps special markets. You know, it'd be like a it would be like your local, like an Aarakocra bodega or a Vidalcan bodega on the corner. The Aarakocra can fly. It's not that, the Vidalcan can't climb up ladders or steps. But by absorbing oxygen through your skin, you can breathe underwater for up to an hour. So for an hour a day, we can breathe underwater. How much business gets done there? Can you go underwater where the Aarakocra can't function as well? And of course, if we want to make it, this is our world, we're the DM. If we say, maybe they could be, maybe they can just breathe underwater. Or if you still want it to be partially amphibious, we say you can breathe a number of hours equal to your Constitution modifier. How about that? Or your Constitution score. If you know the parameters for your world, you can present it and account for it in whatever semblance of balance might exist. Pardon, with your players. And so here, Panda, we could have Aarakocra and bodegas at, in spires that have been built up. And we have Vidalcan bodegas that are beneath the waters. And and through this all, we never really talked about. We talked about these two as the major species here, but we did also bring up that, like, the discoverer, the founder, someone who has a statue that has been erected here, someone who's important. We randomly rolled up was a bugbear, and we were talking about that this could have been a monkey like a simian. A simian kind of arboreal race. So we have flyers. We have those who, well, the Vidalcan don't have a swim score. Again, if you want to give the Vidalcan a swim speed, go ahead. But we may also have living, as maybe they're the ones who trade with the outsiders. But we have bugbears, and if you want to say, sure, hobgoblins and maybe even goblins. You want to turn goblinoids into simianoids. Maybe they're more monkey-like. They are more like primates. So we have these arboreal, these like sylvan creatures. So they don't really fly. They really don't swim, but they're land dwellers. We have the Vidalcan, which can operate in water. And work upon the land. Of course, there's Aarakocra who can walk along the land, but they can also fly. So they all have their own niche. Yeah, and James, because because they can't fly with that. I mean, there may be some who just love the feeling of weight. I mean, society has people who like to deviate from the norm. And so there's nothing saying an Aarakocra can't wear heavy armor. It's just that they can't fly in it. Though if we're describing the culture, they're going to have coverings or armor. If there is clothing, that will be gauzier. It'll be lighter. It will be maybe instead of focusing on metals, because what if they're afraid of how do they solve the icing problem? What happens if there's a static buildup or something along those lines? So they could use, wood or leathers or things along those lines. Or even, if we're talking we have a paper-centric society, they might have even found a way to take paper pulp and almost paper-mache, to almost make paper-mache armor that's lightweight, but it can dry and stiffen, kind of like a boiled leather. But it's still light. And if they need to shed it, they can do so easily enough. And then, of course, think of all the decorative elements that can go onto a papier-mâché armor. And yeah, Panda Frame, these are excellent ways to add character to a city. Feathers, talons, we're going to have, light armors, clothing. And here's something to consider. Is clothing optional? You know, if we see here, and it could be for the sake of our, you know, the sake of us as human beings, can you present a culture in a way? And I mean, the answer is yes, because have you ever seen, you know, National Geographic or the like, where, you know, clothing is not worn for modesty. Clothing would be worn for ritualistic purposes, or the only clothing that would be worn would be armor. You know, whether or not there's a sanitary concern, maybe there is, maybe there's not. You know, do the Aarakocra, you know, they're not mammalian, and so would they value or find taboos in certain parts of the body if most of the physiology is the same between males and females? In that case, you might present your Aarakocran society as very, you know, as very gender neutral. There's really, you know, anyone can wear anything if they decide to, because they could just have a pragmatic view of, well, you got what you got, and congrats. It doesn't turn into, you know, if everything is pretty well internal, and we're not, you know, we don't, in human society, how we place cultural value or crassness or behavior or laws on, you know, on breasts or on reproductive organs and the like. Well, for the Aarakocra, I mean, if you don't have them in an externally manifested way, and yeah, and that's something too. Is there sexual dimorphism? Would the males or females, is really the only way to tell if it's important to you, would it come down to their plumage? Would it come down to their size? You know, are the, you know, do we find that the female Aarakocra are larger because they have to, they carry eggs? Maybe one big one, or maybe they carry a couple like medium-sized ones, or something, or maybe, you know, maybe an Aarakocra that has a clutch of eggs can't fly just because of the, you know, after a certain point, not just because of the danger, but because of the weight involved or something along those lines. So there's a roosting time. You know, we talk about maternity leave. Well, here there's a nesting instinct, a roosting time. You know, how would that play into the food that they eat, the clothing, if any, that they wear? Exactly, Panda. These are the great things to determine, and we can ask the same thing of our Vidalcan. You know, our Vidalcan are very humanoid looking. You know, they can breathe water through their skin and such. Though, who's to say that the Vidalcan also they don't carry, that they carry eggs? You know, what if they're partially amphibious? What if they have traits like mud skippers? I know that's more on the fish side. Or what if they have traits like frogs, where baby Vidalcan are more like, you know, more like creatures, right? They're more like tadpoles that eventually grow into becoming a humanoid Vidalcan instead of a more of a creature-looking Vidalcan. And in that case, if they're not mammalian and they don't, you know, they're not providing milk for their young with mammary glands, then suddenly, you know, is there even an issue of breasts being something to be celebrated, something to be taboo, something to be covered, something to be ornamented, something to be sought after, or something to feel a sense of competition or shame over? That, with what we have, we might have just taken that off. And then what they do is they probably look at the bugbears. If our bugbears are in fact, you know, mammalian, and they're the weird ones because they don't lay eggs, and the bugbears, these kind of simian style creatures, they feed their young from their bodies. And the Aarakocra might say, well, I understand, you know, my little ones don't really digest, so I got to regurgitate in their mouths for, you know. But, you know, after, you know, we start weaning them off regurgitation around 1.5, you know, 2 at the latest. Come on, we're not freaks. You know, or whatever. You know, make a parallel to human beings. And so they actually look at this kind of outlier race of the bugbears, of the hobgoblins, or whatever, as the weirdos. Because they're the ones, they can't really swim nor fly. They might live amongst and in the trees. They give live birth to a baby that they carried inside of them. I mean, how inefficient is that? Think of all the food that they have to consume, about how precarious that is. And then you might even have the Vidalcan and the Aarakocra look at a breastfeeding hobgoblin or a bugbear mother and think that is, you know, like, oh, that's quaint, or that's vile, or something along the lines. Or, of course, you know, you get the people in the markets who do lewd etchings, because, you know, that's a niche thing that only, you know, a subset of people have a kink for, because it's foreign. It's kind of an unknown. You know, not that we don't get along, because we actually have a statue lauding, you know, this great influencer or creator of the city, who resembles a people that we might look down upon in some way, or we just find to be very foreign. And we have to change our mindset. And I'll tell you what, Mr. Plunderloot, you can attest to this because you play a couple lizard folk over at D&D time. In Volo's Guide to Monsters, there is an excellent exploration of this for the lizard folk. If you read the lizard folk racial entry in Volo's Guide, because it gets you into this foreign mindset, into how how do lizard folk perceive the world? How do they speak? You know, Mr. Plunderloot, with your character Crixus, I mean, you talk about making skin roll-ups, and of course, you know, to us as human beings, we're like, ugh. I mean, never mind like pork rinds or cracklins or whatever, but, you know, you were just like, yeah, we take a strip of skin and then we roll it up and marinate it or whatever. But at the same time, we get into this other mindset of the lizard folk. And that is a delicacy. Crixus is a master chef among lizard folk. And so what he prepares is definitely going to be off of many people's menus. Yet Crixus is a well-known, amazing chef among the lizard folk, because that is their culture, that is their mentality and their pursuit of culinary excellence. Let's see, Panda says, I'd vote for milk patches, and Vidalcan appreciate waterproofing. So yeah, we're talking about, we're also talking about ink maids. Ink maids. Maybe because we do have a paper producing society, you know, we have a need to write. We're going to need inks. How do we get that? Well, we can crush up plants for dyes. We can crush up animals for inks and other things. Or in this case, if we almost have, you know, if we don't really have mammals, or mammals are the outlier, then we can, what if we gave squids, or we just invented some other kind of animal? What if we gave a local animal ink sacs? In fact, here's a really good example. And this is going to go back to everything that we've built on so far. You know, there's a common prey type that are fiends. And so in this case, you know, if the grasslands are known for varietal fiends, you know, fiends are devils, demons, Yugoloths. There's a couple other outliers as well. Why don't we say that imps, in this case, imps might not be necessarily intelligent or under the sway of a devil hierarchy. They could just, an imp could just be a type of fiendish animal. Well, imps have little scorpion tails as they fly around. And if we're not milking squid, what if people raise imps and they actually go and they'll milk the imps, just how people who make anti-venom will, they have snakes, and once every couple weeks they'll get the snake to bite into a cup that has like some kind of a skein over top of it and get the venom to come out. So here we have an ink maid, as a milkmaid. We have an ink maid whose job it is to go out to the imp coops and to milk the imps, because maybe it's toxic, but they produce a fantastic medium to make an ink. James says, gather the magical darkness of the dark mantle to write with. Dark mantles, James, what type of monster are those? Now, not that we can't reskin it, but I'm kind of wondering if that could be a fun, it writes itself. If any of you know what is that a monstrosity or is that an aberration? It's a monstrosity? James. Ta-da. The common prey type of the forest are monstrosities. And in our case then, we can reflavor dark mantles to simply be like flying squids. And maybe dark mantles have an ink sac. It could be even magical. And so we have people who go out and they'll harvest imp ink, and then we have people who will harvest dark mantle ink, or powders or other dyes. Daly says, remind me again why we're on this quest, quoting Ethelred the fighter after his first dark mantle encounter. Yeah, there could even be a hunting economy as well. Look, trading furs and such in the new world, those were luxuries back in the old world. So of course, you go out and you're hunting different types. And we could even say that, people are switching over to imp ink because everyone preferred dark mantle ink, and they've been hunted to the brink. An inky brink, a brinky ink. And you see how this all plays in. This can all play into what happens. And by the way, I still love the fact that we made hootenannies as instead of owlbears as owl goats. So somewhere in here too, hootenannies are providing meat, or hootenannies might also provide, act like sheep where they're providing hair. Maybe hootenannies. I don't know what's There is a species of cat, I think, that eats coffee beans and digests them and poops them out, and they're supposedly better. And so this species of animal is valued for what their digestive tract does to an otherwise already valuable commodity. Hootenannies might very well be fed a particular diet, and then something in the excrement for growing plants or to process something. Maybe hootenannies. We want to talk about extracting aluminum. Maybe hootenannies as a monstrosity eat dirt. Eat this stuff, and what happens is after being digested, you can actually find aluminum in their waste because of the internal process of grinding out the organic matter, as the hootenannies are want to go through and do that. Moonjade, what are we talking about? We're talking about cats that eat coffee beans and poop them out so that we can sell them at a very high price. In other words, we're talking about D&D. In other words, we're talking about real life. Hey, Raven. Civets. Yeah, that sounds correct, James. I'm sure you could just Google poop coffee beans, which you can do, but then that's going to be in your Google search history forever, and that's on you. So... Well, yeah, that's true. I mean, for those who use DuckDuckGo, because they do not track or care about your web history. Yeah. Raven, I had to set up for a joke. So these are things to think about here. For our aquatic race, they can breathe through their skin. They might have particular talents. In fact, the Vidalcan themselves, you know, if this is a culture where the Aarakocra can, you know, offer their feathers, maybe they trade feathers to the Vidalcan to write, especially if they're the ones who are very literate. Or they brought this bureaucratic culture. What if the Vidalcan themselves can actually produce an ink? Now, is there a mechanical benefit in some way if they were to, you know, like, I don't know, squirt out ink? Like, do they have an ink sac per se? Not like the Simic hybrid, although I'll tell you, if you wanted to have a Simic hybrid be a kind of a sub-race to the Vidalcan, I think you could do that. But in this case, too, I mean, if you want to introduce the fact that, you know, here we have an aquatic race that took on more mammalian features from what they used to be as merfolk. What if then, in either males or females, what if one or both develop this ability to produce ink themselves? I mean, now that would give the term ink maid a whole different connotation, yet that would be an essential civic function. And these would be people who are paid. I mean, just like, you know, there's an economy. There's an economy for people, for women who are lactating, that you can sell your mother's milk to other women who have trouble producing it naturally, or, you know, maybe they can't because they're on a certain medication or chemotherapy that, you know, not to be passed along. But you can sell, you know, as human beings breast milk. In this case, if we're talking about the Vidalcan, if they have, you know, maybe through an animal, or maybe they want to keep it homegrown and organic, what if a portion of the populace, along whatever demographic line that you want to draw, actually can create an ink? And maybe theirs is more valuable because Vidalcan ink might be a good underwater ink. It might be very valuable because the ink that we render out of imps and dark mantles could be, you know, solid generic ink. Or maybe imp ink is better for magical scrolls, whereas dark mantles are pretty well, you know, it's just the good old-fashioned universal, you know, you put it into an ink jar and you write a book with it, kind of a thing. So we have these different grades, and that is all based on the culture and what might be acceptable. You know, and you go around and Hamster says the nearest tavern to the poop factory should be named the Stench Pit. And yeah, Raven, look at me, I'm so stressed I'm molting. Wait a minute, hours later. High quality feathers for sale, for trade. So think about this. James, what is that word descriptive of? I'm not familiar with it. Is this like a Caecilia with an octopus lower half? As they're described in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, the Vidalcan have more of a human form. They're bipedal. though, Wiffle, if you feel that describing your Vidalkin as having, you know, maybe the vestiges of tentacles for legs that kind of have been fusing together over time, that's fine as well. Especially if you want to say that the Simic hybrid race in the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica is a cousin or sort of like a sub-race option available in this setting. Is that a term that's used in that particular industry, then, James? I'm sorry. I think I missed the context of it. Oh, it's a show reference. What's the show? From How I Met Your Mother. Okay. Dawa Setrepla. Downwind of the sewage treatment plant. Well, then there we go. We're talking culture, and I missed out on that little bit of culture. They should have a hero named Tentacles. Is it pronounced like Heracles? That's right, I said Heracles. What up, proper pronunciation? What? Yeah, the more like the Ursula style. Yeah, so instead of merfolk that have a fishy bottom half, they have the eight tentacles. So maybe in this case, that if we want to say our Vidalkin have like ink sacs. If they're partially, which means that they don't need the water, but they can use the water still. Nothing is really forbidding them from wearing heavy armor or the like. What would a race like this appreciate then? Ooh, pardon. Could they appreciate clothes that absorb water so that they can feel more comfortable if their clothes are wet? Clothing like towels, things that don't wick away more moisture but draw it. So heavier garments. What about jewelry? What would Aarakocra or their derivatives and Vidalkin? I mean, if they don't get belly button rings because they don't have belly buttons, if maybe they don't have, if they breathe through their skin, there might be some, a taboo against tattoos. Maybe it makes it more difficult. And here we have Aarakocra. Maybe they dye their feathers, but tattooing isn't really a thing. What kind of a jewelry would they wear, especially if you want to stay light and fly? Or you want to stay light and, be able to manage swimming a little bit better in this case. They don't have a native swim speed, base walking speed. But it is, it'll be what you want it to be here. Would they want to be lightweight? Is jewelry not even really a concern? Or would it be wooden or something along those lines? Maybe a lot of metals don't pass through. There's not a lot of metal in the silt here. We talked about the area possibly being very rich in petroleum or coal, and we were even discussing how the corpses, it says the undead are rising and attacking. What is coal or oil but the dead? And so we're talking about like tar, like it would be like a tar ooze, but it wouldn't be an ooze monster, it would be undead. Hi, goblins. Good to see you. We're talking about something like a golem that was made out of coal, but it would be undead because it is made from dead material. And think about this too. If that's the case, let's say that this area, because it used to be an ancient floodplain, layered up, and we're talking about things like the land itself, like not quite like Strahd in Barovia. So a column. Yeah, there you go, Ravenstill, a column. You know, that could possibly make limestone a feature that necromancy could animate. And I want you to consider this as a DM. As a dungeon master, would you allow things like this to be considered, you know, undead components? Think about a ghost that is made out of natural gas. And wouldn't that make for an interesting encounter? A column, that is technically undead because it's made from organic matter. You know, these kind of shifting, shambling tar creatures. James says very light, might not want to have it to be... the shinies for at home, you know, in private, when you can look at your collection of shines. But yeah, like for practical purposes, being shiny. And Panda, you say grind the column for ink. This could be what is sparking the adventure. You know, as the corpses are rising up. And remember, too, when we say undead, it doesn't have to be, oh, you know, that was Great Uncle Herschel or whatever. I mean, we could have... have you played in a D&D setting where dinosaur bones are extracting themselves from the soil and getting up and rampaging across the land? Or that, you know, we have the whole, you know, the trope of, oh, the haunted house was built on the Indian graveyard, kind of, you know, the old horror setup. What if the natives are restless because their bones are, and in fact, whether they were beasts or whether they were these kind of simian style bugbears or whatever? This place could have been built atop a native burial ground. Oh, you get to play in a game called The Witch is Dead, and it's similar to Honey Heist. Well, Honey Heist has a very good pedigree, and so if it's like that, Plunder Loot, I'm sure you'll have a blast. And so, yeah, maybe after a recent flood or something, Panda, there was a discovery that, you know, instead of harvesting... And by the way, thank you for the YouTube subscription. And thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for that. Speaking of zombies and undead, to replace the dark mantles that are slowly going extinct. And of course, if the Vidalcan, if their ink sacs aren't producing enough. And the imps, and maybe something's going on with the imps because the undead are eating the imps, right? The undead are the alpha predators. Well, then we have to find a new source of ink and a new source of whatever. And in this case, if our restless dead is tar and petroleum, like raw oil, you know, shale, and, you know, some sedimentary rocks, limestone and whatnot. Natural gas ghosts. Of course, you definitely want to hit those with fire, don't you? And how intense would that be if over the... Yeah, you know what, Panda? That would be a whole new take on Tarred and Feathered. But can you imagine the horror of realizing that the land is coming unalive around you? And think about what that would do over the course of your adventure, especially if this is an anti-magic zone. Where you know, that sort of stuff doesn't work anymore. Or maybe stronger stuff can get further in. And it becomes much more isolated. It becomes much more claustrophobic. You want to run a horror campaign set in this? There you go. You want to run a campaign or a story that takes on an ecological message to parallel our own world. There you go. You want to run, go out into the field and hunt to, it's a above ground version of kick in the door and kill all the monsters. There you go. Do you want to have political intrigue? Here you go. This setting can accommodate all these different layers. Now, I do want to consider as well, while we're here, we have a market system, we have a trade system. Raven says, I just thought of a way to do a new style of my DM's Flow Rock Canyon. For those who weren't there for your story about it, Raven, can you give some context and then what your idea is? So here we have this market system. Let's consider what are some trade goods, and more importantly, what do we produce? From what we produce, what do we export, and what do we not produce, such that we must import it from other people? Now, a couple things that we are talking about is we produce paper, right? In this river, in this great river, there's a bunch of reeds like papyrus and such. So we probably have a flourishing paper industry, and also think of all the trees that are here too for wood pulp. Using the natural resources first, let's look at that. So we have paper from reeds. We probably have a sense of aquaculture, fish or a lot of waterfowl. And so aquaculture could be bird meat or eggs or the equivalent for fiends or whatever. This could also be fish or seaweed or something to be prepared. Maybe, a special medicinal herb or a flower or something. So we produce paper, aquaculture, ink. Now think of this also. What do we also produce? We produce bureaucracy. In other words, if people want to trade with us, we produce forms, we produce laws, we produce procedure that even if another country doesn't have that system, they must still conform to it. What we produce doesn't just have to be material goods. We are also producing this bureaucracy. For any of you that live in Canada, you can attest to this. If you want to make something and sell it in Canada, it must also have French on the labeling, and your French must be accurate if you want to import stuff into Canada. It is the law. I don't think anything would have changed such that it's not anymore. But for any of you that are in Canada and can back me up on that. And so here, I might live down in Louisiana, and I grow a mean cayenne pepper, and here I am. I'm in the U.S. South, almost the southeast South that ever South. And for 100 years, my family's been making a special home recipe cayenne pepper. I guess Louisiana would be. I could possibly be exposed to more French in Louisiana. Anyway, you get what I'm saying. I've only ever sold to the U.S. And now, due to a popular meme or something or a movie reference, my spicy sauce is now in high demand in Canada. If I want to sell my spice in Canada, I have to put French labels. Like I have to go and redesign. I have to rebalance the wording, make sure the translation is there, and I meet their nutrition standards and all this other stuff. So our city is producing a bureaucracy. That Plunder Loot is apparently this is is this what some of the radicals are saying? Tarmageddon is upon us because we have these shambling tar mounds. James, exporting staples, filing cabinets, and such. So yeah, in this case, we may also produce some very interesting furniture, especially because we have aquatic and avian. Our two predominant races are aquatic and avian. So we might have some custom furniture. It could be made out of reeds, could be made out of wood. But down here, this is going to be trees, pulp, planks, woodworking. In terms of finished goods or even the trade. Panda says, this is close to my field of work. I am a metrologist. I study and invent new ways of measuring things. Well, then, Panda, you are welcome to contribute your professional education and the things that you've gone on to study and invent and improve and research into what we're doing here. Because weights and measures is also an indication of an advanced society. Because the society is looking for honesty and consistency. You know, what would be the equivalent of our avoirdupois pound? What would be the equivalent of our gram? How do we measure things like temperature? Hamster says, so I just found my spice dealer. I need Cajun mix for my barbecue. Is Cajun food popular up your way, hamsters? And if not, you have very good taste for being like one of the only people around who appreciate it. But you are correct. How do we go about weighing things? You know, we can say water is important because, I mean, water is, and that's how we've based, our temperature and weight, because it's important to us as humans. In this case, would a pound of feathers weigh the same as a pound of gold? It's a trick question. What would be the standards? Would... Subway had a Cajun burger for a limited time here, and they took my money indeed. It was just so good. The humidity, right? If you're flying, you need to be able to measure the wind, the speed, for the current, especially if you're conducting trade. And, so we have a metrologist. And what about meteorology? That druid cantrip that can predict the weather would be very important to a place like this. I used to use Cajun spice on everything, says Gracie. Burgers, chicken, pasta. Have you moved up north and then you just put Montreal steak seasoning on everything? That could be acceptable as well. Ooh, pardon. So this is a short list of things that we produce. And that we can even go on to export. Though maybe culturally, for ink, we might have writing, magical, and underwater, like waterproofing. In this case, we might only export writing ink because the other stuff is only for us. And we, so unless it's smuggled out or there's high tariffs or something, writing ink might be, the only thing here that we'll export. We might export wood and reeds. But maybe we never export finished goods because it's our culture, our totems, our art style. And so we're fine. We'll send out bushels of harvested reeds. They can't put down roots anymore, presumably. So they can just be ground up or consumed. Oh, and by the way, we might also... make things like rice. Speaking of Cajun, hey... rice, spice, okra, if it's really sandy soil, something like spinach, various vegetables like watercress. Yep, lumber mills, grain mills and the like, that might not only use the water but also use the wind. There could even be a little rivalry between what can power more things. You might find windmills and water mills, and and that's creating internal competition in the same society. So here, as an industry, we have milling of some kind, wind or water. James Norris, they measure their temperature in cricket chirps. All right. Now, let's talk briefly. We can always expand the lists, and I don't want you to stop thinking about this. Let's come up with 5 things that this society would need to import, if we don't think reasonably that it could produce it in this area here. And by the way, notice that we did not put something like coal, natural gas, or oil, because while that will be the predominant discovery, and especially how it interacts with necromancy, it is not a known, or at least it's not an appreciated quality. It might even be seen as a pollutant that occasionally leaks into the river that has to be cleaned up. And maybe they're just used to burning it off. But they never made the connection. I mean, because it makes a foul black. They never thought about processing it or refining it. It was always just this foul substance that occasionally would blurp up to the water that would have to either wash away, or they just pile a bunch of stones on top of the leak and hope it goes away. What are some things that this place must import? And remember, this place is known for greedy merchants. There's a lot of importation going on. If the culture does not produce a lot of jewelry, then as a finished good, jewelry, precious stones, and metals. On that, I would also even say things like worked metal items. This is not exactly a big mining town. In fact, maybe they tried to mine, and that's even what angered the spirits. In the forest, there's a big scar as we randomly rolled. Hey, it writes itself. Maybe they tried to strip mine. Maybe they actually tried digging, and they did it in the forest because they thought, well, there's a bunch of natural resources here. And then that's what caused the petroleum to ooze up out of the ground. They considered it cursed or something. And the trees and other plant life won't grow because this sort of strip mine area in the forest kind of like oozed up and has sort of become like the oil, the petroleum, and the natural gas and stuff is almost like a pus. They consider the earth infected because of this. And that could also be what leads our sealed pyramid into the superstition or folklore about the undead coming back and haunting people. Hamsters, by law, I think everyone there is required to make their own meat and drink it. I mean, that's sarcasm. What's the population density? We have not discussed it, Panda. I mean, this could be it could be very dense if towers are built and it's a very vertical society because of the Aarakocra. And then, of course, too, if we have a semi-amphibious people, that could mean a lot more water real estate as well, in, under, or around the water. But most of it is going to be concentrated here, but we never really set up a scale. We don't know if this is 2 miles or 20 miles along. So this can be what we'd like it to be. What do you think a society that we're building would have for population density? So we have work metals, and yes, I saw something here as well for non-hootenanny cloth. Especially if it's light. I do not know the type of soil or landscape that flax needs to make linen, that the flax plant needs to grow, but this might not accommodate it. And so the invention of linen, or the discovery and processing of linen, or maybe even cotton. Now, I know cotton was a common crop in Egypt, and of course, you know, if there's not really the desert portion, but if we do have, you know, a fertile river that brings silt and such down from mountains and you know, through this land through, but maybe cotton doesn't exist here, and cotton would be exactly what, you know, maybe the Vidalcan, if not the Aarakocra. Birds don't really do odor, so not so much perfume. So, Panda, you're predicting a medium to high for this area, as there are 2 major races and a significant travel and trade path. Yeah, this does seem to have a more advanced economy. So I would imagine this isn't like a little sleepy farming town of 200 people. Silks. Silks might be a something to import. Maybe silkworms, this is just not the place for them. And of course, we didn't discuss what's winter like here, what's summer like here. Is there a demand for furs or leathers or for heating? I'm going to presume that the winters here are pretty moderate. You know, if we have an avian race that is more stationary, then we're probably talking, you know, it doesn't have to be equatorial per se, but you know, we're getting into lower latitudes. Or if we want this to take place, in the southern hemisphere of our world, maybe we're in the northern latitudes, and it gets warmer the further north you go. Have some fun with your players as a DM, and describe how water swirls the opposite way than what you're used to in the real world, the Coriolis Effect. And your players might not get it. They'll think, oh, is that magical? Or or otherwise it would be a clue about just where you're at. You know, we take something we know, but we flip it. So we could very well be, the sun rises in the west. Or everyone knows the further north you go, that's where it gets warmer. And people love going to the north. It's those darn frozen barbarians to the south that we have to worry about. The toilets are just sticks 4 feet up in the air. Hey, there's a reason why on ships the bathroom is called the head. And if any of you know that reason, you're welcome to share it in chat about why the bathrooms aboard sailing ships were called the head. So we have non-hootenanny cloth. Could include silks. We probably also import certain foods. I think that's correct with what Panda Frame was talking about. What kind of foods? Now, if we have a refugee population that's presumably been here for a while, because they were actually the natives. They were the merfolk that lived here and established it before, you know, they built the canals and everything, and they went north. Then something happened over time where they both turned into Vidalcan or branched into Vidalcan. There was a plague of some variety, and they came back south. Because, the merfolk left because the Aarakocra came down from the mountains to the east because something happened in the mountains. It could have been climactic or cultural or branch family that adapted. The Aarakocra came down, drove out the merfolk when this was all a big, like a shallow sea or a floodplain, drove them north. The Aarakocra settled, where the merfolk were probably building, like, at the time they were either underwater or partially, so the merfolk could have built big spires and whatnot that the Aarakocra wanted to move into because something happened at the mountain far off to the east. Then eventually there's a plague, and the now Vidalcan, not merfolk, come back south, and the society has been here. But in the time since the Aarakocra arrived, there was also this bugbear, this kind of arboreal race of simian people, these goblinoids or whatever, that lived in the area. And maybe they don't anymore. They could be a very rare, maybe the Aarakocra treat the goblinoids as like an extreme minority, or how we might have in the U.S. or in Canada reservations for native people. That like this is their native land that we've said, well, this is yours and you can have it. But other than that, we're us, you're you. Do your cultural thing, we'll do ours. There's certain ways that we get along together, and that's I know that's a gloss over of the modern incarnation. I'm well aware of what led to thises and that's, and that's a whole other discussion that can bleed into D&D. It's fine to talk about these topics, about war, about injustice, about crime and culture and slavery, or other atrocities or genocides and the like. We can talk about this because it takes place in the world, even if we don't want it to. We need to understand how these things can happen. Not just for the sake of the story, but if we know personally, then we can act against it if we see it starting to happen. And so maybe there's this honor, like there's this statue of, in the case here, it would have been, we had an alchemist artificer. So, in a parallel cultural, this was the medicine man of the original tribe that lived here, but maybe they died out. Or maybe they were driven off. They were driven off further west. And maybe that's where some of this trade comes in from the things that we're getting, is we're actually trading with the goblinoids that continued west after the Aarakocra had come in and had built up what was around the original merfolk and goblinoid people that lived in the water and on the land. Then the goblinoids were driven away, the merfolk were driven away, the Aarakocra roosted, they settled in, then the Vidalcan had come back. All the while, the merfolk who had set up this system of locks, some of them were left behind in this dungeon, in these sewers. And that's why I said these are the Morlocks in the tunnels. And we randomly rolled that they are core, if you know the KOR, core from Magic, and Tortles, and we kind of squished them together to make Cortles. These kind of like maybe blind or like maybe super dark vision, like super light sensitive, climbing turtle people, which were a mutation of the merfolk. And if you need inspiration for, well, how could merfolk mutate? It could have been something in the water. It could have been a genetic virus, like what we saw explained throughout the Star Trek series about how Klingons had ridges, lost their ridges, and got their ridges back. It could have been magic. We live in a world of magic, and if you have magic, you don't need to explain anything. Although it helps if you do. It really does. Though I think we all get, okay, it's magic, etc., etc. Sorry, I missed out on chat here. So Gracie is in the Pacific Northwest. Pan, do you think that they get various arts? That could be. Especially if art comes in the form of jewelry or precious stones or metals. Then it could be that way. Now, if there's another type of art, if they don't have canvas, maybe the thought of things like linseed oil for oil paints, mixing that with pigments, maybe that's baffling to them. And also, what kind of art? Can you look at paintings underwater? We say that there's waterproof ink, so maybe that there is in that regard. You know, jewelry can withstand being in the water as well. You know, gold, silver can oxidize, but, you know. But as there's not a lot of stone, it could also be things like statues. In fact, maybe that's why they have an intact statue here as a central piece of art, because the goblinoids knew where to dig or knew where to find stone. Or maybe there used to be a little mountain here that got leveled by the goblinoids, and all the raw material went into, you know, building up this city on the banks of the river. So maybe, you know, masonry and stonework / also sculptures. Daly says, the term comes from the days of sailing ships when the place for the crew to relieve themselves was at the way forward. Because, yes, you remember, so if you're going this way on a ship, here's your sail. The wind is blowing this way, right? So the ship is blowing with the wind. If you're a sailor and you relieve yourself back here, where's the wind going to carry the evidence? Either in physicality or in smell. And so, when you go to the head, you go to the head of the ship because the wind is going to blow it forward. Where other people will not be reminded of your biological necessity. I am, Daily, I am not showing that I'm dropping frames tonight. Daily, I'm not seeing dropped frames. Though you said that 2 minutes ago because I'm catching up in chat right now. Hey, McGruber, welcome. All right, what's one more thing that this culture would import? And by the way, we'd probably also export things like fiend organs, or, you know, things that are to our local biome here. What's one more thing that we might import? And let's look at the ecology and geology. Vehicles might be. If we have people who technically don't swim as per the book, unless you want to give them a swim speed, we might need a lot of vehicles to take our things out on the road or to better patrol our area, because the Aarakocra don't exactly have a lot of skill with wagons and you know, being wagon rights. The Vidalcan tend to be aquatic. Maybe naval. They might know how to build ships, especially for rivers and the like. But maybe we need to import a lot of carts, or they need to import a lot of pulleys. You know, elevator systems. Seems to stabilize. Yeah, I'm, shoot, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'll type it here. It must be Twitch, as I am not showing that I am dropping frames. And I'm going to type 2:11 a.m. right when my clock hits 2:11 a.m. And so when that happens, that'll happen in 30 seconds. So as soon as I see my computer clock hit 2:11 a.m., I will type it in chat so you see it instantly, and then you can see when I show up on your screen and say 2:11 a.m. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. It's like stirring for capsules. 5, 4. We're not there yet. Now we're at 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and 2:11 a.m. Hamsters! How dare you? That's true, though. Everyone, hamsters with hats does live in the future. So. Oh, you know, something to import? If our two races have gotten along together very well, you know, they had this bureaucracy, they have a system that's been working for both of them. It seems like they've been living in a harmony. They've kind of lived in their own bubble. They've done a lot of trading because they have unique things to trade. They may very well need to import adventurers, laborers, and even mercenaries to help them fight. Because, you know, while we're describing things like fiends being varietal and common in the fields, they would have grown to adapt. You know, maybe among them, you know, cleric and paladin style abilities are the norm. So they can very easily overpower and adapt to, you know, to fiends and celestials and all that. However, they might need to actually import labor through bugbears or other goblinoids, or maybe even there's this species from over the sea. They're really weird. They're called humans. They can't fly. They can't swim really well. They can't breathe underwater. They don't have a 10-foot reach like the bugbears do. They're not really good at anything except reproducing. But you know what else does that? They're like rats. But you know what? There's so many humans, and a ton of them are looking for something to do that hopefully isn't our significant other, that maybe we can employ some of these humans from across the sea. They don't have feathers. They don't have gills. They really don't have a lot of fur. They're just kind of like naked and bald and... Ugh. Humans. We got to import human. Any port in a storm. And you know what? If humans want to throw away their life, you know, humans might want to just move in. In fact, there's some humans that are even willing to pay us to set up a mercenary band out in that field that just got flooded with oil. The fools. Do you know how toxic that stuff is? And the humans want to pay us for it. Sure, we'll sell you that oil field. God, it's a bunch of naked dumb apes. Take all the oil you want. Please. We don't need it. God. I guess it's worth tolerating them if they're going to pay us to be here. It's better than us paying them. All we got to do is let them take out our garbage. Oh, God, those humans are dumb. Right, everyone? We just got to keep them away from... we just got to keep them away from our sons and daughters, because I'm not paying for a wedding and whatever happens, because humans seem to be prolific. Especially the ones that sing a lot. Let's go. For those of you who are lagging, sometimes a refresh of the page can help. Otherwise, I'm sorry, comma, but it's gotta be on Twitch since I'm not dropping frames on my end. Now we can go forever and ever in this regard. Some other things, hey Purple, some other things to consider. Do you want to use the traditional copper, silver, gold? Do you want to use other metals? Do you want to use beads and seashells? Do you want to use feathers and talons? Do you want to use teeth? Do you want to use aluminum? Because aluminum is a scarce thing that hootenannies, that only hootenannies seem to be able to extract through their digestive process as they consume the grasses and stuff from the ground. What do you want your currency to be? And if that's the case, then maybe all our currency is printed in aluminum and it just has various denominations. And maybe to us, you know, 1, 5, and 10 and the like are, you know, to this culture, it just isn't, it's not as, and by the way, aluminum, good for flying, lightweight, and it also won't necessarily pull you down as heavy as gold and such will. So aluminum would be a great metal if we want to go for a currency. But maybe the races got together and said, you know what, things are pretty good in threes. So maybe you have a 1 and you have a 3. Or maybe you just have a 1, 2, and 3, because with those numbers you can create whatever. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 30. Or something along those lines. And when you're creating an economy as a dungeon master, ask yourself this question, or a question similar. How many pine cones does it take to buy a squirrel? How many pine cones does it take to buy a squirrel? Why pine cones and squirrels? We need to measure how much someone's labor is worth if we're going to be trading labor, which is exactly what money quantifies. Money is a reward for you giving up a portion of your scarce, unknown time in this world to someone else to do what they want you to do. That is what money is. That is the manifestation of money. It's a way that we can bank our time. Now, of course, we might also have time banks or labor banks in this society, which would be really cool and a great form of commerce. And if you're not familiar with a labor bank is you and I go through a labor bank and we make a promise that I will paint your house. You know, supply me the paint and I'll paint your house. And so what happens is it takes me 4 hours to paint your house. The bank has a record that I spent 4 hours working on your house. Now, what happens is I need someone to deliver me eggs, okay? Because I don't have the time. I'm painting other people's houses. And so I go to the time bank and I say, you know, I'm looking for eggs. And someone says, oh yeah, Farmer Jones down the street, it takes him about an hour to get a dozen eggs. And I say, well, I have 4 hours in the bank. I will spend an hour of my time if Farmer Jones can give me an hour of his time. And then later on, you know, if we want to call in a favor from someone else, we have 3 hours left. We talk to our accountant, says, your books are a mess. It's going to take me 3 hours to fix your stuff. I have 3 hours in the bank because I provided labor to someone else. And so we're all sharing in labor through a time bank. Maybe that's how the vast majority of the society works, if there's not a physical manifestation of coinage to represent the value of our time. half bard is a new race, says Raz. Something, alright, well. Yikes. I'm sorry all that this is happening. Must be peak hours and pleb tiers like us don't get priority. There we go. Just hit 221. 221, everyone. So ask yourself a ridiculous question like this. How many pine cones does it take to buy a squirrel? And from that moment, you can start planning your economy. How much then would a measure of unit, you know, because we're talking about with Panda above. Panda, I don't know if you're still here, but if we talk about things like a bushel is a measurement. If I want a bushel of watercress, how much does that cost? And I want to remind you all, if you want a sample to base your economy on, you go to chapter 5 of the player's handbook. You know, it'll tell you about exchange fees, if not on monetary conversion, on, you know, if you want to sell an item, what you might get back. Oh, Thantos. In case you don't see this, Thantos, thank you. And what do you wish to put that towards? Now, this doesn't exactly have how many pine cones to the squirrel, though this does give an idea. You know, not only do we know how much things can cost, such as mounts and vehicles, you know, animal husbandry, it costs time, it costs resources, but take a look here at trade goods. Trade goods on page 157. 1 copper piece in this sample will buy you 1 pound of wheat. Now, what can you do with 1 pound of wheat? So therefore, what can 1 copper piece buy you? 2 copper pieces can buy you a pound of flour or 1 chicken. Now, this is interesting. Wheat is wheat. Flour is, you know, flour's made from wheat. Flour is processed wheat. So we are paying a copper piece to mill a pound of wheat into flour. Do you see what's happened there? And then we take a parallel step and say 1 chicken costs 2 copper pieces. Now, if we do a little math, for any of you who do keep chickens, how long does it take until a chicken goes from hatching to being ready to either lay eggs or be ready for the pot? Ask yourself that. And then ask yourself, how much wheat does a chicken need that goes into raising 1 chicken? And that's even if you're feeding it wheat. It might just be eating bugs. Chicken tractors are kind of a thing. Now, oh, salt. Salt here is a little bit more rare. 1 pound of salt, which in medieval times was very valuable, right? Worth your, there's worth your weight in gold. But the term salary is what Roman soldiers were paid in salt. Salary and salt. Because salt is not only a spice, it's a preservative. And when you didn't have refrigeration, salting and curing your foods was very important. Now, if we determine that salt is very common in this society, then it's not going to be 5 copper pieces or an equivalent in aluminum or whatever for a pound of salt. That's something to consider, though. Hi. Now we come down here, a silver piece for a pound of iron or 1 square yard of canvas. A square yard of canvas is not a lot. You know, if you want a good pair of pants, then you're going to be buying probably 2 or 3 square yards of canvas and a couple hours of labor and other material. But do you see how you take these building blocks? Take what is important that you produce or have available. Ask yourself, how common is it? And then you can start building a trade good. Towards the PC part, says Thantos. Very well. Two minutes ago, it said I dropped frames. And hello, Old Wolf. In fact, I'll type it. Hi, Old Wolf from the future. The stream seems to have a bubble in it right now, so delays may happen. 11% drops a few seconds ago. All right, so the bubble has come back and is popping, but that's fine because I think we're toward the end of our workshop and our discussion. You know, so think about this. What does your society value? What does it have in abundance? What is your time worth? If you want a squirrel, how many pine cones am I going to ask from you so that I'm going to give up a part of my day where I could do anything else? That's called opportunity cost. And if you don't know opportunity cost, go to Investopedia.com. Investopedia.com. Look up opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost for labor or goods in your society? And if this society does not value gold because it's heavy and it glints because it'll reveal your aerial position or whatever, or it just doesn't do it for you besides maybe art, and even then, like, I don't know, I could carve something out of wood and paint it yellow. We might have a society that does not value gold at what the goblins down the river value gold at being. Gold could be almost worthless. In fact, gold could even be something that is panned for. Gold might even come down from the mountains, you know, in little like gold nuggets and particles and everything. The Vidalcan might even just harvest this because they know the goblins further downriver love gold, and they're crazy for it. And even beyond that, those wretched humans, not only want our garbage in the fields, this coal and this tar, they're not only going to pay us for that, but the humans want our gold too. This useless heavy metal. Ha! The fools. The absolute fools. That's fine. We'll take your silk. You can have our gold. And we'll pretend, you know, like, oh, of course, it's gold. Right? Don't you love? This is the perception of culture. What does your culture value? And at what cost, opportunity cost, does your culture value that? And we can go into the minutia of religion, of you know, and really boil it down. For the sake of the workshop, we have the core. You know, we already said that there's probably a strong like mechanical paladin and cleric vibe among the people here, which is how they can interact with fiends so easily. It's how they can handle them because they're used to handling them. They've developed a tolerance. Many of them are magically resistant or have a wisdom or whatever that would pursue this mechanically as well. There's just this inclination, and of course the rangers that know how to hunt monstrosities. They know how to milk dark mantles and imps. They just know how to do this because it's what they've been doing. It's how they've lived. So from here, you have a jump point to build the minutia of this entire society. And now, when you are ready as a dungeon master to present this world to your players and say, here is the situation, and you know, the problem that we're going to be exploring is there's a bunch of this Texas tea. Up from the ground came a bubbling crude. You know, the bubbling crude is coming up, and it's manifesting as undead. Now, from that and your setting primer, have fun. You have the races available. You can think about whatever classes you want. You have an idea for the problem, and you can go outside because maybe you've been exposed to this culture because you want to be a goblinoid. Maybe you want to be a human mercenary from a distant land who's here. Ugh, humans. 5 fingers on each hand? That's an extra finger. What do they do with that? No, I don't even want to know what they do with that finger. I've seen what they do otherwise. I don't want to know what they do with that. And it's gross. It's a little finger. What do you do with this little finger? Ugh. Humans are icky, everyone. All right, hamsters, be well, my friend. Oh, you're wondering about the criminal system? If rather than jail, feathers were all plucked away? Yes, James. So I had something like that instituted when I was running Tomb of Annihilation at the store. A host family claimed the visitors, and you know, because they're a very, you know, lawful, organized society, and all the visitors were told that if they misbehaved, that their host family would be punished. And so what happened was one of the party members misbehaved, and no one spoke up, and so the person who had to take responsibility was the father of the family, whose flight feathers were clipped. And now, you know, he wasn't confined. It's just that his flight was taken away from him for about a month until they grew back. And the father of that family felt terrible because he couldn't produce for his family. His family had to rely on other people to take care of him because the father couldn't go out hunting. The father couldn't go out and do the things that his job needed because of the flight. And that absolutely was punishment. The culture took it as punishment. He took it personally as punishment, and the players all felt horrible because they let that happen. So you're correct. In a justice system, in a criminal system, what would be punishment? Would you have your flight feathers cut? Would you have to wear some kind of like I don't know, would you have to wrap yourself in something that would prevent you from breathing water through your skin so you were only confined to land? Or, as a Vidalcan, if we said your skin was sensitive and tattoos were kind of, you know, looked down upon because they interfered, you know, it was sort of like, I don't know, like smoking and reduced lung capacity or whatever. What if you're a criminal Vidalcan, what if you're given almost like a henna tattoo that would last a while, but it would interfere with your skin, so you'd have a constant, like an itchy reminder, and a reminder you can't breathe through those closed up pores until this kind of quasi-temporary tattoo faded away enough. And until then, everyone saw that you were a criminal because you bore the mark. You had the cut feathers or you had the tattoo marks. The Scarlet Letter. Yeah, there you go. PV, you can talk to me about that because I was the one who originally who originally set that up, and I worked with Jeremy on that to make it more prolific across all the races in the new spreadsheet. I mean, if you want to go eye for an eye, you know, the old Hammurabi code, we could, you know, that could be discussed as well. You know, how advanced or barbaric do you want this to be? And in fact, if we're saying that, you know, the land is coming alive, honestly, exile. If you don't live in this metropolis, which is a haven for these people that was built by them and for them, simply being branded and told don't come back, that could be punishment. We're not going to jail you. We're not barbarians. We're just going to let you go and you live out in the forest. Be a hermit or die in a tar pit or go live with the goblins. But you're not welcome back here. You might be assigned a duty if you're a Vidalcan. You might be assigned a duty in the upper spires of the Aarakocra where, you know, escape would be more difficult because you can't fly. So you're jailed, but you're still providing a service for someone else. And Aarakocra could be sent into the watery homes of the Vidalcan. There's a lot that we can do that can complement it and also carry different, you know, harsh, culturally harsh forms of punishment, capital or otherwise. Well, Draconian in that way, yeah, you'd feed him to a dragon. All right. I'm going to take a quick break. I need to refresh myself. I'm going to type this in chat in case there's a delay. Plunder, I'm going to take a break to refresh myself. Then we'll pull your capsules. Oh, and you said okay. Well, there you go. I'll be back soon, everyone.